All righty, before we get started, I want to introduce John George. John is from, where are you from?
I don't know. I'm not sure, all over.
He doesn't know where he's from.
I know it. He travels more than anybody I know, but he's...
No, I think Stan's may have the edge on me.
yeah, he does. He travels quite a bit too. But he's based out of South Carolina and does the alternative inspections over there. I used to do the inspections over in South Carolina, and I did it for, I guess, a couple of years, a couple of years, and I finally told him over there, I said, I enjoy coming over here. It's a beautiful area, but it's costing you guys a lot of money for me to drive all the way over there. I said, you need to find somebody else to do the inspections in South Carolina. So John is doing those over there. We actually have I'm going to introduce John, let him say a few words, and I'll get the video ready, and you can introduce Ron.
Oh, that's what you want me to do, impromptu. Well,
yeah, impromptu.
Larry and I have worked together and known each other for longer than we would admit. We both worked on the Alternative Broadcast Inspection Program for our respective states. South Carolina's been a participant since the late 90s. Basically, I operated as an administrator of the program until the past few years when I've pretty much become full-time in the inspection side of it. Larry and I also work together and do a couple other states as needs arise, and have worked very closely with the FCC and with several committees around the U.S. that works on alternative broadcast inspection. So what you'll be hearing today is, from personal experience, what we've learned, some of it's interpretation. A lot of it is what we've gotten from our attorneys and from the FCC. So I think we're bringing a lot of experience to the table, and we're also looking for a lot of interaction from each of you, because everybody has a story and we all learn from each other. And so please, as I mentioned earlier, feel free to ask questions as we go along, as opposed to waiting to the end of the day. That way you don't forget your question, and we look for your input as well. Thank you.
All right, we've got Ronald Ramage, who is the field office director with the Atlanta FCC. They were tied up and couldn't make it down here, but he sent us a opening message on his iPhone, and we got it in here. And so a message here, sort of a greeting.
Hello, my name is Ron Ramage, and I'm the director of Region 2 of the FCC Enforcement Bureau based in Atlanta. I recently met with Sharon and Larry, and they told me of their plans of the ABIP training they're hosting this year. And from what I hear, you have a full class. So my thanks to both of them and the rest of the ABA staff for putting this program together, and for your continued interest in broadcasters, not only in Alabama, but extending the offer to those in other states as well. Our goal at the FCC is to work with broadcasters to maintain compliance with the rules and keep a level playing field for all licensees. As ABIP inspectors, you are helping us with that goal. But more importantly, you're helping broadcasters in your respective states by sharing your knowledge while you're at their station. The reason I say that is many of the ABIP inspectors that I have worked with in the past have expressed how the job is a mixture of inspector as well as educator. Both roles are important, and both are very valuable to the broadcasters you work with. If during the course of your inspections you have any questions or situations pertaining to the rules that you need answered, then please give us a call. Either myself or my colleagues will either answer the question ourselves, or we'll try to find somebody who can answer the question. So good luck with the training, and while you're there, be sure to enjoy the great hospitality Alabama is known for. Good.
Okay, everybody's here. What a good crowd. This is really a good crowd. And we got a good start. I want to talk, as John said, it's going to be sort of free-flowing today, a lot of ad-libbing and going back and forth between each other. So feel free to ask any questions. I want to talk a little bit about the history of ABIP, how it actually came about. It actually started in Missouri, I think it was, back in the mid-60s, 64, 65. The Missouri Broadcasters Association came up with this idea of alternative inspections, and they sort of put together a plan to see how it would work. And they joined forces with the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and they worked out a program, presented it to the area FCC office out there, and the FCC thought it was a great idea because, granted, the commission does go around and do inspections, or they used to, a lot more than they do today. They just don't have the staff to do it. And the major thing that the commission is looking at is just making sure that everybody's playing on a level field so that you're not interfering with the next person and everybody's got an equal chance to operate a radio or a television station. And there are some rules and regulations that you have to follow to make that work. There's pros and cons of whether some people like the FCC, some people don't like the FCC, some of the stuff they're doing, but you got to have somebody sort of riding herd over it. You just can't, I mean, you can't go and put a Starbucks on every corner. I mean, somebody would go out of business. So they sort of have to ride herd on it to make sure everybody is doing what they're supposed to do and doing it legal and not interfering and following the rules and regulations. So that's the only thing the FCC looks at. And so this alternative inspection program, which is now available in all the states, every state broadcast association has a contract with the state broadcast association to do these. And then the state broadcast association will hire an engineer with the approval of the FCC office. We have to be approved by the FCC office in our area in Atlanta. And then once that goes, then we can go out and do inspections. We notify the commission when we, as Sharon said a while ago, when we do an inspection, we notify the commission that you have been inspected, and they put that in their database so they typically won't show up on your door, not knock on your door. Although I had a call from one of the guys from Atlanta one day. He said, he called and he said, I wanted to apologize to you. I said, for what? He said, well, I was down in South Alabama and I went to this station and went in and showed him my handy little badge and his gun. No, they don't carry a gun, but they carry a badge. And he said, I'm from the FCC and I've come to inspect your station. Well, very calmly, the receptionist pointed up on the wall and said, well, we've been through the ABIP program. And he was embarrassed. He said, oh, I didn't look at my database before I went in there, and I apologized to the lady and said, have a nice day. So he called me. He said, I just wanted to apologize to you in case they call complaining that I showed up on their doorstep. So the difference in John or I or any of the other inspectors going into a station to do an inspection, I always tell people that when the inspector comes in from the FCC, they have a little receipt book that says, thank you for your voluntary contribution to the U.S. Treasury. Well, we don't carry a receipt book. We just go in, we look at the things that we're supposed to look at on the sheets that were handed out, and those of you who don't have one, Sharon's running some off. This is a checklist that we came up with, John and I put together. There is the self-inspection checklist that all of you have seen for AM, FM, and television, and I think there's one for LPFM now, and somebody said translators. There's one for translators. But what we have done, this list that you see here is actually a cheat sheet for me and for John so that we don't forget something. I just make notes on there what we're supposed to check. And it's much more involved than the self-inspection checklist because over the years, as we talked earlier, the self-inspection checklist is rather old, but it is in the process, I think, as John said, of being updated. So what that is when I see something from the FCC where they have slapped the wrist of a station for doing X, then I add it to my list because I think it behooves me. Okay, you didn't get one. See who didn't get one. Did it print on front and back too? Okay. It did. Okay. So that's how it actually works. And that's the history of it. That's how it got started. And it's been going on since 1964 or 65. There's been a lot of changes throughout those years. The rules change almost daily. You never know what the commission is doing on changing rules. So John and I and all the other inspectors try our best to keep up with the rule changes. And one of the things that we try to do more than anything, that if a station has a question about an issue that we bring up or they bring up and we're not sure of what it is, we just don't make something up and say, well, this is just the way it's supposed to be, or no, this is how it does. We will say, we'll get back with you, and we've got contacts like Ron and the people in Washington where we can get the correct information, or go back to legal people to get the right thing, because it's up to us to make sure they're doing it right, so we got to tell them the right thing to do. Any questions about the history of ABIP program? It's been a really good program, and I guess I think even Puerto Rico and Alaska have these programs, and Guam. I think
every state in the U.S. and territories are participants in the ABIP program. So it's critically important what you're doing here today, and it's critically important to the FCC, even though they don't necessarily show it in that respect, because we are in a mode where we do a lot of self-policing among the broadcasters.
And once they see that we have inspected somebody, then they know that station is in compliance, and they don't. The only time, as Sharon said, the only time they'll show up typically is if they receive a complaint on the station for either from somebody, or maybe your tower lights haven't been on for a year and a half, and they'll come back and talk to you about that. The goal is just to help you become compliant. I look at it, and I think John does as well. It's an insurance. It keeps the commission from knocking on your door for 3 years. But more than being an insurance, it's also a educational tool. It's used to help you understand the things that you're supposed. Most of the stuff that I see that are in non-compliance is that they either didn't know you were supposed to do it that way, or they forgot that was what they were supposed to do. And we'll discuss quite a few of those as we go through. The way the process works, and then we'll let John pick it up here in just a second, you have to sit down, as Sharon said, when a station requests an inspection. And that's done any number of ways. Different states do it in different ways. If you're a member of the of the association, they will normally contact the association and sign up to have an inspection done. We keep a database, and it's good for 3 years, the inspection is, so I know when stations are coming up for renewal. So we will actually, when I see a station at the beginning of the year, what I'll actually do is I'll list all the stations that are due that particular year, and then send contacts out to them, reminding them that their certificate is about to expire, and then we will schedule you. And what we normally do is look at the calendar, try to scatter them out based on when theirs are going to expire, and again, like we mentioned earlier, try to group them together in a certain area of the state so you can make one trip. And since they're responsible for paying expenses, mileage and meals and hotels, that helps the cost be lower for each individual station. If I go and do 4 in the northeast part of the state, then the mileage is divided by 4, and they just have to pay. So they like that. And plus it's less wear and tear on us to drive it all over the place. I have gone and done one and come back, but that's a lot of driving, but that's how that actually works. The online public file, that has become every station now as of, was it March 1st of this year? Television went up online a couple of years ago, I think it was. And then the top 50 radio stations went up last year. Last year. And then as of March 1st of 2018, all the remaining radio stations were supposed to put their public file up online. And typically, that's what took the most time for me and John when it was a paper file, was trying to rummage through that mess of paper that they had called the public file. But now it's online, and John has actually got a way to actually go online and show you how that actually works.
All righty, thank you, Larry. How many people in the room have worked with their station's online public file? So about half of you, okay. The public file is really the workings. It's like the heart of the radio or TV station. I mean, I know you think transmitter, antenna, that's critically important as well too. But the public file is a group of documents that prove that you have served the public in general interest or in best interest. Your license is presented to you to serve the public, and so this is how you give that proof. There are a number of documents in that deal with EEO, they deal with some programming aspects, whether it be children programming, public affairs aspects, ownership reports, those kind of things that we're going to all go through. Let's see here, I want to look ahead for a second. We're going to switch over and show you what happens when you go to the FCC's online public file. The first thing you do is go to the website. Now, Larry and I, when we're doing our inspections, we always visit this website and do the inspection before we actually visit the radio or television station. I think it's important that you do that because, as Larry's already mentioned, we're here to teach. We want to find stuff wrong, but we also want to help that owner or engineer, or it may be an administrative assistant who deals with public file, to be able to correct any issues it may have. So this is a learning process for everybody. So you go to that online inspection file, and we're going to scroll down here, and of course we're going to look at the bottom of the page. You can type in call letters. Let me scroll down a little bit more here and see if we can take a look. There we go. And I'm going to type in the call letters of a local station. Okay, and it'll bring it up. And a lot of times, if there are multiple call letters at this point, you'll see FM radio, AM radio, TV. There may be some cases where old line all have the same call letters because of common ownership, even though the ownership may be split up, but they'll all show. So we're going to go to FM radio, and we see WBHM Birmingham, so we're going to click on WBHM Birmingham. And remember, you're on the FCC's website, and so sometimes things can move very slowly. Sometimes you will find on weekends that they don't move at all because they're constantly doing servicing to the website. So while I do like to sit in my office on Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon, and I've got inspections for the coming week, I'll sit there and go through the files. Sometime you're going to find that they're not available. Now, the first thing you see here is you've got WBHM. It gives the frequency of the channel and the facility ID. These are all things that are critically important to the Commission, and actually critically important to the facility because they use a lot of this information from time to time. You'll also note right here that you can put your logo up. How nice. So whatever logo you have, you can actually load it to the site so it'll look nice. Or you can not do anything. Now, as we get into the information, the first thing you see right here is the station license. Now, everybody, I assume, in the room has seen a broadcast station license before. Okay. Well, you will see that it has an individual's name. Dale Bickle happens to be at the Commission for a long time. He happens to deal with databases at the Commission, a really good guy. Technically, even though nobody really enforces it, when you go to the station, it should have the license that has Dale Bickle's signature on it. That really makes it official. But there are a lot of times that for whatever reason it got lost, it didn't get forwarded. You can download the unsigned copy. And as you see here, it's unsigned. It gives the call sign, WBHM, it gives a license number, it gives the grant date, the expiration date, and if you notice, it's a current license, but it expired in 1996. We'll show the renewal certificate in just a moment. It talks a little bit about standard provisions, and most of you have read that, and we won't go into that. Then we get into the technical data. The name of the licensee, it happens to be the Board of Trustees, location of the station, frequency channel number, class C1, hours of operation unlimited, transmitter type accepted with sections 73.1660 and then the other rules. Transmitter power output. Larry and I had a lot of fun talking about this yesterday. There are two types of licenses that you'll run into. There are those that have the transmitter license output and the antenna type and a description, and those that don't. We don't understand why there are a number of licenses out there that never had this information, because it's required when you file for your license to provide that information. And you actually have to file the calculations to show how you determine what the actual TPO of the transmitter is to achieve your ERP. So if you see a station that's like this, most likely you're not going to know the number of bays that are on that antenna. You'll walk in and you'll see a transmitter, you're going to look up and see the antenna, and it's technically going to be your responsibility just to look and do a rough guesstimate if they're operating at the right power on their transmitter. Now, the engineer should show you documentation as to how he determined that information, and on the transmitter should be a label somewhere posted or in a notebook somewhere that shows what the efficiency is of that whole system. And we'll get into that formula in a little bit. Now, the other type of license you will see will have the number of bays. It might say 4 bays. It will give a model number. For example, if it was a ERI, it might say SHPX-3E. Means it's a 3-bay end-fed. If it was a Shively, it might be 6810-4-SS, for example. That would mean that it might be half-wave spaced or some special spacing if you see a designation like that. And then it'll have the transmitter output power up there. And let's say it just says 9.25 kilowatts. So those are the things you're going to look for that license. If the station is licensed with a 4-bay and it's half-wave spaced and it's 9.2 kilowatts, and you show up on site and there's a 6-bay there and they're putting out 5 kilowatts and there's no documentation to show it, you can't pass them because they're not licensed for that operation. So the big difference you find between the ones that don't have the information on it gives flexibility to that station, but you still have to ensure that they are meeting the requirements to equal the proper ERP with the number of bays and TPO versus the license that actually says the number of bays and what the required TPO is.
One of the example of that, I went to a station one time and his license was like this. It didn't have any TPO or anything about the antenna. And I asked the engineer, I said, what is your TPO supposed to be? And he said 17,000 watts. I said, okay, how do you know it's supposed to be 17,000 watts? And he paused for a minute and he said, well, that's what the engineer that I took his place said it's always run. I said, well, that wasn't really a very good answer. We actually did take the time, and we'll show you later today how you do this. I went out and determined how many bays of antenna he had, knew what the gain was of however many bays it was. We calculated how many feet of line he had just by, you can look down here and it shows where the center of radiation is above ground. We calculated all that out, and when I did the math, it came out 17,000 watts. So he was right. It just wasn't on his license, and he didn't have any documentation showing why it came out.
And then you notice as you move on down, you see the radiation height above ground in meters, and of course above average terrain. In most cases, you're not going to worry about above average terrain because you have no way of calculating that out. That's done by a consulting engineer using specific software. But you should look at the radiation center above ground and estimate. It's easy to do by looking at the tower sections and determining are they 20 feet or 10 feet apart. Most of them are 20. Look at the number of tower sections and you can measure it. Or if you carry a really long tape around and have a small drone that'll fly up to that point and do the measurements for it. Only kidding. So those are some of the things you also want to check. You'll also notice that in the licensing information that there will be, of course, latitude and longitude. And Larry and I have done a number of sites so many times, we know that they're at the right location because we've checked it, but we actually do carry a GPS around, and we'll go out and place the GPS right at the base of the tower or close to the base of the tower and get a rough estimate. I don't recommend that on AM, especially if you go to Frank's AM, because the GPS will melt down, or you will get burned. So that just gives you an indication of the license and some of the things you run into. Any questions so far?
Does it make any difference if you use NAD 27 or NAD 83?
Well, remember there is a difference, and you want to go by what the Commission's website is. Because otherwise, if you look at the commission, I always get these mixed up as 83, I think, isn't it? Yeah, 83. 27.
I think it shows it on the, if
Yeah.
you scroll down.
Yeah, let's see here. I always have to look at that. It's one of those things I have a mental block on. Let's see here. No, it doesn't.
It doesn't show it
No,
on there.
it does not show it. But if you go, one of the great websites, and write this down, because it's easy to get around, and the FCC site is complex, is FCCinfo.com. It's a website by the consulting firm Cavell and Mertz, and it's great. It has everything for AM, FM, TV, shows pattern information. It's updated every night at approximately midnight when the FCC site is updated, and that will become one of your best friends if you're doing inspection. It'll become your best friend if you're just doing regular engineering and you're looking up information. So just keep that in mind if you're using a GPS. Be sure you've got the proper NAD set and everything, or your measurements will really get off. All right, the renewal application. See, I can spend hours on this, but I won't spend too much time. Here's the latest renewal application, and you see that the license expires in 2020. Now, you need to have this card. A lot of people don't have the card, but they'll have a copy of it. And I like to see these things when I go out. Some people still post it on the wall. A notebook's very acceptable with clear folders and have all your licenses in each sheet, but you want to see that license renewal there with the original, most recent technical license. So those are two things you want to have. Yes, Paul?
Well, just FYI, the FCC, at least on their line converter page, says they're still NAD 27.
Oh, NAD 20, okay. Well, whatever is on that site you use, I always get those mixed up and I have to look. So thank you very much, Paul. So again, just be sure that you're using the right NAD, whether it's 27 or 83. Otherwise, when you go to do the calculations, it's going to be way off. You'll be in a different state and that won't be good. Any questions on the renewal?
You can't have you just can't have just one of these. You can't have the renewal without the license, and you can't have the license without the renewal. They have to go together. So.
It's just the most recent renewal you're looking for, right? Or do you have to?
Yeah.
No, the most
most
recent. Yes. Yeah. The past renewals, and we'll talk a little bit about past documents, but you want the most recent renewal and the most recent license. I will mention when you get into AMs, that's a whole different world because some of the AM licenses are so old that they are not on the FCC's automatic upload that went into the online public files. It is the responsibility of the radio station to upload that license. Now there's another gotcha there because you can't upload that license to the license folder. The only place you can put it would be additional documents. And that's the only thing you can do. They didn't take into consideration when they wrote the software that the FCC wouldn't have all the licenses. Another thing you might run into is a lot of stations have auxiliary antennas, auxiliary towers, and those may or may not be loaded up to the site, so it's the responsibility of the radio station to do that. A number of years ago when they were updating databases, the commission actually lost a lot of that data for auxiliary licenses. So it's your responsibility. If you lost your license and they don't have a record of it, you got to start from scratch again. So you want to be sure that those licenses have been saved and they're uploaded to the online public file and they're kept in safekeeping place with the rest of your licenses. AMs are going to be the biggest kicker, especially some of the small AM stations. They might not have had a new license for 20 or 30 years. And they've got to have that document because if they don't have that document, you can't do your job. You can't check the impedance. Well, you won't check the impedance on the tower, but you need the impedance on the tower. You need the base current from that license because you want to check what the power is and if they're operating properly. You also will need information off that license if they're directional, and you've got 4 or 5 or however many monitor points that you've got to go check. So that license is critically important, and hopefully you have it. Another part of that license as well is the driving instructions to find the monitor points. Now, that's another quick challenge, because I have been guilty of this as well. Is you go down 3/10 of a mile, you turn at the old church at such and such road and go to box so and so. Well, you get there and there is a shopping mall in that location. There is no Oak Tree Church, box so and so, or anything like that. So now with the newer field meters, they all have GPS locations, and you can monitor it by GPS. So if you're the owner of that license or the chief engineer for that license, you want to be sure that your monitor points are kept up to date and document that information. Otherwise, when you show up on the site and the chief operator or the engineer, whoever is taking you to the monitor point, can't find it, you know he hadn't been there in a while. So.
Well, there's a Walmart built right where you used to make that, and he didn't know that. So that can be very embarrassing to the engineer. And
now, as we look in other documents here, and they've done a good job of this, they have their STL and RP license, they have their translator booster license, they have their tower lease agreement, they have their earth station license, because they have an uplink, and they have their, weather's on their tower as well too, I guess.
Yeah.
So they've got a lot of information on there. You don't necessarily have to have all this. I think it's great that they have their STL and RP licenses, their translator license. Tower lease agreement, I'm not too sure about that. If they do have a lease agreement, you definitely don't want dollar amounts posted on there. That should be blacked out. So any kind of contracts that are posted in the public file, everybody's going to see, and you want to be sure that confidential information is not listed on there. But we'll just click here just for a quick second. And let's look at the STL license. I'm sorry, Firefox, you know they do. There we go. And he's downloaded the reference license. Now, one thing that we do check, even though there's a discussion that's been going on for years among inspectors, is whether you do STLs or don't check STLs. Larry and I do spot check STLs with microwaves just to be sure that their paths are close to being correct, because there have been numerous fines passed out, and about every 2 or 3 years the commission will make an example of somebody and they'll drop a $10,000 or $15,000 fine, because what has everybody done? We have all moved studios at least 2 or 3 times in our lives, and most of the time the last thing you think about is the STL. You just run across town, hook it up one night, switch it over at midnight, you're back on the air and life is good, and nobody ever checked or anything. Now there's a process that you have to go through, a coordination of licenses, letters have to go out. It's a real pain to deal with, but it has to be done, and it's to protect interference, and so we do spot check that. Yes, Frank?
One thing, what do you do about, for example, I'm looking at their license and I'm very familiar with that station. They're using the old split channel frequencies there, but they've gone digital. What do you do then?
Technically, they should have filed for a new license. Now, while, again, this is not part of our main inspection, I would advise, and I think Larry would do the same, we would advise that they need to update their license for a digital. And they could run into a problem here, because let's say, now their bandwidth is okay, but let's say they didn't have enough bandwidth for what they were trying to do with digital. Now you got a real problem, because not every channel can be 500 kilohertz wide and handle digital. So that's something, and a good point that you brought out. These are some of the little gotchas you find out there. And again, it's educational. We're not lowering the boom on anybody. I couldn't necessarily prevent somebody from passing an inspection on that, but I would certainly advise them, because the commission could come in at some point and say something to them about it.
the studio location is the most important, because if you move and you don't update that, the commission will fine you for operating an STL at the wrong location.
Yeah. Well, wait a minute, you don't have to have studio anymore, so where's the STL going to be?
There you go. It can be in your house.
Yeah, everybody does know that about the studio rules, and okay, I just want to be sure. We don't have to get into that, but that's changed a lot.
As long as your latitude and longitude for your transmit site is correct.
Yes.
Your receive site.
Well, yeah, for your transmit and your receive site, because you know, you could be transmitting, but you could be sending, you know, in your old site you were at 25 degrees, and at your new site you're aiming off at 185 degrees or something like that. You could, people don't realize how far 10 watts on an analog STL can go.
Of course, you're supposed to go through a coordination.
That's
service,
exactly
but-
right.
Right.
But a lot of people don't do it. So it's something you definitely want to watch. All right, we're going to move on down the line. The next thing is applications and related materials. And while we wait for the commission here a moment. It's thinking about it. Anyway, some of the applications and related materials while we're waiting would be, for example, if you have, here we go, licenses, for example, that were granted, renewals. Here's a renewal application that was from 2012. Now, the commission does say in the rules that once that license has been granted and everything has been satisfied, you don't have to keep this information anymore. Now, one of the biggest problems we've run into as inspectors is when we did the paper public file, I'd walk into a little small market AM daytime station and it's 4 file cabinet drawers full. There is the history of this radio station dating back to 1920, whatever. Now that's great. I tell people don't throw it away. There's history here you want to hang on to. But you don't need that for the public to come in and look at. So when the renewal has been completed and your license has been granted, you can go to the FCC site and you can click a little button and it will turn that off for public view. It's still hanging out there in a folder, but the public doesn't see it anymore, and that's what you want to do. Same thing with the old paper files. Pull it out, put it in a box somewhere, and store it in the transmitter building where it'll catch fire like everything else does at the transmitter building. You've been to transmitter sites, you know what it's like. I had one engineer at a transmitter site recently. Instead of them cleaning out the building, they just built another room for the transmitter and sealed everything else off. You have assignments, which would be if they're selling the station, STAs. I mean, you know, one thing you'll note too under here, especially let me go back to the original, it'll show documents when they were uploaded, which is very nice. All right, the next thing we're going to go to, well, we got back to the applications here. It's moving slower than I want. Ownership reports.
This is really something that's not new to the broadcaster because they were having to keep this anyway. It was just in a, hopefully they were, in a paper file in the station. So it's just, these folders over here are just like the folders in their paper file. Yeah. That's all it is.
By the way, before I forget about it, the first thing that's going to happen when you walk in says, oh, well, can I throw away my file? You know, it's all online. Well, it's kind of like your income tax. They tell you to hold it for 3 years, but if they come back and really look at your income tax, they will go back 7 years, statute of limitations. And for those of you that have had fines that over public files and stuff like that, they'll stretch it past 7 years. They can go to 8 or 9 years. And because they know it'll cost you more for legal support than it would be to pay the fine to the commission and move on. So don't throw away your public file. Tell your ownership if they want to get rid of it, get some nice banker's boxes and put in it. If they really did want to get rid of the paper, be sure that you have all the documents that are on the FCC online public file saved in multiple locations. Because if this file ever went away, by accident or what happens, they're going to come back to you and say, send us your file so we can upload it again. And if you don't have the files, you're probably screwed. Now, we don't know how that would be and how that react, but the commission does make mistakes. And there's a multi-step process of when you put stuff online. And I have seen some cases of where people have it uploaded and it didn't get processed properly at the commission. And while they had the documents and they had the receipt, it hadn't shown up online and they had to make a phone call to somebody and get it fixed.
I worry about us when the government shuts down.
Well,
Being able process so we can go out and do inspections.
Well, remember, if the government shuts down, the FCC shuts down too.
Yeah.
So, you know, you might not be able to access it, and there wouldn't be anything we could do about that, and that would be questionable. You would have to look at their paper file or just wait until the federal government started back up again to look at the information. That's what the commission would probably say. But again, be sure that there's an electronic copy of the for you and the stations that you work with, as well as if that question comes up, can we throw it all away? All right, now here are the ownership reports. And sometimes if you got time and you're not doing anything, ownership reports can be a lot of fun to read, especially if it's iHeart, Cumulus, Alpha, any of the big groups. And if you go to the old days when you would go to the public file, a lot of them would have CD-ROMs in there because, and it was legal because there weren't file cabinets large enough to put the ownership reports in there. Well, now they're all online, and if you see, they've got their biennial reports and their ownership here. Everything is as it should be. This does vary from state to state a little bit, but these ownership reports sit there and reside throughout the license term. It's a little bit different with nonprofits than it is commercial stations. When you look at the ownership report, the commercial stations will have the owners. Now, that can be very convoluted with large groups because there are multiple ownerships in the groups, and you know, iHeart 1 owns iHeart 2, 3, and 4, and they're all part of iHeart World and all this kind of stuff. Well, in the world of non-commercial, there is a board of trustees. This is normal for every 501c3 corporation that are out there, universities and everything else. Now, the one little gotcha that you have to watch out for is when there is a change in ownership with commercial radio that's filed with the commission and that results in another document. Well, in a university or a church group or a nonprofit, if there is a change in the board of directors, that is like a de facto change in the ownership, and that has to be filed with the commission and updated through an ownership report. So it's one of those little gotchas. We normally, I don't know, do you dig down that deep when you go look at ownership reports? I mean,
And on the board of trustees?
yeah.
Sometimes.
I mean, I think it's more, I hate to say it's more the mood you're in, you know, if you had time to really look at it, or if they say, oh, well, they start asking you questions. A lot of times, a lot of this comes from questions that are asked from within the station you're inspecting. So just remember, if the board of trustees and a nonprofit has changed and it hadn't been updated, they do need to update that. That's where they would get their communications attorney or whoever does their legal work and their filing to take care of that. Just one of those little gotchas.
The biggest thing that I always look at is that according to the FCC rules, if you look at the public file rules, you have to have the most current ownership report available in the file. So ownership reports are filed biannually on the odd number years, so they filed them in 11, 13, 15. There was supposed to been one filed in 17. It always happens on December 1st.
Yeah.
And there was supposed to have been one filed December of 2017, but the commission was in the process of changing Form 323 so it could be used electronically. So they delayed the requirement that you file your ownership report from December 1 of 2017 to March 1 of 2018. This is what we were talking about earlier, that you really have to keep up with the rules because they changed almost daily. So everybody had to file as of by March 1st, but it had to be retroactively as of had you filed it on 2017.
Yeah.
So, but normally it's every other year.
Yeah, that's why they call it a biennial report. And the most recent, most people leave them in the file and it's no objection throughout the license term, but it is the most recent on those. Now, The other thing you have to watch out for too on the ownership reports, there's some other things in there. There are contracts that are supposed to be there, and those are contracts like network contracts and specialty programming contracts and affiliations. Again, it's not anything dealing with dollar amounts of confidential information. You also can say, and this is more prevalent for larger groups, that if they don't have all the contracts listed, they can provide those contracts or give you information in those documents within a reasonable period of time. Also, another little thing that's popped up a few times, and it's never really been specified in the self-inspection report, is the articles of incorporation for a business. Every business is some form of legal entity, whether it be sole proprietorship, partnership, subchapter C, LLC, or a full corporation. Those documents are supposed to be available to the general public and technically would be online. Now, what you should see is articles of incorporation are available upon request and will be supplied within 5 to 7 business days, something on that order, for those people who do request that.
Yeah, that is in the rule that you have to supply it
Yeah.
within 7 days. A station recently got fined. It was sort of a weird situation. There was a disgruntled employee or somebody that went in and wanted to see the file, and he requested the ownership, the articles of incorporation, and the management said, I'll get it to you within 7 days, and he didn't get it within 7 days, so whoever this was filed a complaint with the commission, and they actually got reprimanded for that.
Yeah.
So if you do have to make it available to them within 7 days.
Yes, you had a
We have
question.
a customer that's oddly enough sole proprietor, and the only thing we can think of that would be equivalent of articles of incorporation would be their SS4 form, which would include like their social and stuff.
Yeah.
Can you redact that out?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's been a lot of controversy on Social Security numbers because for anybody who works in non-commercial, like Board of Trustees, they wanted their Social Security number for each member of the Board of Trustees. Well, you know, I do contract work for a college station. I can see me walking up to the University of South Carolina telling the Board of Trustees, we got to have Social Security numbers. You know, it's going to be no and hell no. But the commission finally saw light, and they got around that, because that is, well, you can go on the dark web and find everybody's Social Security number anyway, but you know, but anyway, that was an issue. Paul, you had a question.
John, on ownership report, let's say it's in there, but you notice that it was filed late. Is that actionable, and how?
We're not in that, and Larry, you chime in as well too. As long as it's in the file when we're inspecting it that day, it was in the file. We're not, I don't get into a case of saying, hey, I'm not giving you a certificate because you were late filing. I want to see the documents in there. Now, if they were really, really late filing, you know, I might pick up the phone and Larry and I have a conversation, and we might talk to Ron, we might talk to our attorneys, and not giving out any call letters, but I really haven't run into that. Usually I find that a day or two late, I don't think anybody's going to shoot you on that, and there's always extenuating circumstances. The biggest problems we probably run in is usually it's just missing. Yeah, it's not there. So
There are some requirements of dates, especially when we get on down to issues and programs.
Yeah.
They have to be filed by the 10th day following the end of the quarter. With the paper file, and I've told people this, with the paper file, if you were a day late or a week late or a month late putting them in there, who's going to know? I mean, nobody knows. If they're in there when I get there, I mean, I don't know when they put them in there, but they're there, so I'm happy. The problem or the situation now with it online, when you upload stuff to this online site, it's date and time stamp.
yeah.
So the commission knows exactly right to the second when you uploaded that. So if it was due on the 10th and you didn't file it to the 12th, you know, I don't know how far they're going to go in enforcing that, but
We
yeah,
have
there is some time.
we have
there.
no idea.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, just to comment on that, I mean, I don't normally check dates on like the ownership report ought to be automatically populated.
Yeah.
Right.
but like where that comes in is the quarterly reports, like the issues and programs list. And the big gotcha is that, you know, on your renewal application, those are self-reported.
Yes.
On the quarterly, I'm sure you'll get into that when we get there, but on the renewal application, you actually have to say whether or not you.
That's right.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
And we don't know.
Timestamp.
Yeah, we don't know what the new one's going to be like. Remember, there is a term for that, and that's called lack of candor. And that's a real problem, and it's going to be really interesting. I think we all in this room will sit back, and we all have stations we know that have said over the past years, oh yes, everything's checked. We've done this on time, that on time. And they don't have a public file. And they're still not online with the commission. And they've checked on their license renewal that they had everything. So sooner or later, somebody's going to find out. I don't want to be around when it happens, because it ain't going to be pretty.
No.
At the Illinois convention, we sat down with Scott Fleck, out of Pillsbury.
Yeah, I'm familiar with
And
Scott.
He suggested that every station check the yes box because they just want to cover their ass.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be something they didn't upload on time.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That's going to be the case. Now, we've had a case, I did an inspection for some stations some time back and actually got their communications attorney involved. They were missing 5 or 6 quarterly issues and programs. And they went back under advice of counsel. And while I am not an attorney and I don't give legal advice, and the same with Larry, they did recreate those files, which technically you can do. They had done the work. They don't know if it didn't get posted or what happened, somebody left. They recreated the information and posted it electronically when they were uploading their file. And on the last page, in small print at the bottom of the page, they noted that it was recreated and posted on such and such a date. So they didn't lie to the commission, but they did put it in a position where hopefully it'll be overlooked or not noticed. So, I mean, we can't advise. And by the way, we do not ever recommend that you advise anybody on how to deal with any legal documents dealing with the commission. That is strictly up to counsel, and we don't give legal advice. And I cut a deal with our communications attorney. They don't do technical work, so I thought that was a fair deal. So. Could you see Scott doing engineering? That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
As slow as he is.
Anyway, here I'm going to just show briefly the EEO report. You will find 2 types of EEO reports. You will find those that have less than 5 full-time employees and those that have 5 or more full-time employees. It's a whole different world if you've got 5 or more out there, because then every employee that you try to hire, you have to go to multiple sources. You have to keep all the documentation. And you will find that most small market stations always have 5 or less employees. And so you have to look at that very carefully when you walk into the station. Now, we don't get into the determination of all this stuff. That we look to see that the reports are there. Now, that may be changing, because if any of you are keeping up with what's going on in Washington, there has been some discussion of late that EEO may move to the Enforcement Bureau. We don't know how that's going to affect us. So, but anyway.
Scroll down and you'll see where here's the important thing right here. You went past it.
Yep.
Where you click right here. Does your state?
Yeah.
And this is a backward sentence. It must have been written by an attorney, because it's backwards. Does your state's employment unit employ fewer than 5 full-time employees? So it doesn't say, do you have more than 5? It says, it reads backwards.
Yeah.
So if you have less than 5, it says fewer than. You have to click yes.
Yes.
I have been at the stations where it says no, and they've only got one guy there, works there, so somebody just clicked the wrong thing.
And then it gets complex if you're doing a university-associated radio station, because the station may be an all-volunteer staff like a student station, and they have less than 5 full-time employees. But then at license renewal time, the mothership might have tens of thousands of employees, and while they're not directly related to the radio station, there can be questions of EEO or violations or issues toward that entity that have to become part of the license renewal. That's just a little tidbit of information for you. Frank's over there shaking his head because he's been through some of this too. And it's nightmarish, but that's something to really watch very carefully.
That's the key
for.
right there. Full-time
Yeah.
employee is somebody that works 30 hours a week, and the owner, the manager doesn't count. I mean, the owner doesn't count.
Yeah.
You can't count him as an employee.
Now, additional documents. And here's something really nice. As you notice right here, anytime these folders are out here for the commission, if there are documents in there, there's going to be, it says size, but that's the number of reports that are there. Now, here we go. These are all the EE reports for every year. This is the way it should be. And this should also be on the website, the station's website. One of these reports, the most recent one. So let's just take 2017. And there's the EEO report. And as you can see, they had a total full-time, let's see, there were no full-time job vacancies. So they got off lucky there. But they had no referrals, but you see an idea of what they went on here. They didn't hire anybody because they probably, like most non-coms, didn't have any money that year. So, but for a commercial station, if we have time, we can show you later on. But for a commercial station, there may be 20, 30, or whatever, and you've got to list all the job recruitments, where you got those interviews from, where you know how many people you talked to, all this kind of stuff. It's very detailed information, and a copy of this report has to be on the station's website. And that's usually what happens. They don't have it online and it's on the website, or it's not on the website and it's online. So, you know, it's one thing that you can walk in and it can be easily corrected if they know about it and realize it's just a human error most of the time. Any questions on EEO?
While you're on this page, if you notice, and this is just a small thing,
Yeah.
that doesn't really mean anything, but you see they're not in chronological order. If you click this little arrow right there, it'll put the years in chronological.
Yeah.
I discovered that. Some manager said, "Why is it not in order?"
There
Well,
you go.
when you click that, it will actually.
Well, it didn't do it either.
Oh, normally if you click that little arrow, no, this one right here, you click the wrong one.
Oh, I did click the wrong
Yeah.
one. I'm sorry. I can't see this screen. It's
Now
too
see, they're in
small for me.
chronological
There we
order.
go.
Some
Yeah.
manager asked me, said, "Why are they not in chronological order?" I said, "Well," and then I discovered you click on that and it'll put them. That's just a little.
Well, and another little thing you might tell the station, especially if they're talking about some of this, if they keep the same naming throughout, then that's real easy to deal with. That really, when that becomes in handy, is not as much on EEO report, but when we get down to quarterly issues and programs.
So when people first started using this, a lot of people didn't make these little subfolders. The website allows you to make subfolders, and they would just put everything in there at one time. So you would have like 4 or 5 all scattered around, and it was very hard to find them.
Yeah.
But the commission allows you to create subfolders. One of the links in there when you go into the online to their site, that you can make a subfolder and do it by years. It makes it look neater.
Yeah. Now, of course, coverage maps. You know, the commission decided we're going to be nice and we're going to do a coverage map for you. We got tired of looking at those sales maps that were stuck in there. And Larry and I wouldn't accept those. I mean, you know, you can't. It's got to be an accurate, genuine coverage map.
A sales map is done with a pencil with a big lead.
Yes.
It goes out a little further, so when you go to the Chevrolet dealership, yeah, we covered that city.
Yeah. 40 dBU contour.
Yeah.
But anyway, the commission does provide the coverage maps for you. Every once in a while, by the way, depending on the browser you're using, Firefox seems to works fairly well with the commission. But occasionally, it won't bring these coverage maps in properly. You'll just get a map of the world or something, and it's really bizarre, but it's there. Political files, well, we don't have any political files here. But anyway, you see that it's set up 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. And again, you're all familiar with the political files. It has to be immediately uploaded to the site. And by the way, for all the stations that are newbies, that would be all the radio stations, they have to keep their public, in their public file, paper public file, all the political files from the past have to be kept in that locally, so that if somebody comes and visits, because they gave everybody a break, instead of uploading for the past couple of years, they just said you could start today and move forward. You also are required to keep a copy of that file, whether in electronic or paper form, in addition to being online at the station. So you're doing double duty. You're putting it electronically online and you're keeping it at the station, either in electronic form or in paper form, so that if a politician came by the station, they could look at it without having to go online and do it.
I've gotten several questions recently at stations wanting to know what the word immediate means.
Right.
How soon do you have to upload it? Because of the time-sensitive nature of political advertising, if Joe comes in the morning running for an office and he places an ad, and his opponent comes in after lunch,
Right.
and he wants to know what his opponent is running, they have to be able to see
Yeah.
it. So they say upload it immediately. John and I asked Ron at the meeting in Atlanta about that, and he said, well, as soon as possible. Don't wait a week or
Yeah.
several days. At least by the next day, have it up online. But that goes back to keeping the paper file there. Coach, you would have that anyway because you have the contract the guy signed, and that. I don't know if I don't think you mentioned this, but what goes in that is actually any request for political time, whether or not they buy. It doesn't
Right.
matter if they buy or not, but if they come in and request rates, you got to put that in there. You normally have a form. I know ABA actually has these forms available, and then the contract when they buy, and then the traffic affidavit that it actually ran. That's what actually goes in the public file. So.
And Larry goes through every one of those